Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. My name's Alison Fitgerald Kodjak. I am the assistant managing editor at ProPublica, a nonprofit investigative newsroom based in New York. I'm glad to have you all here with our distinguished panel. We were going to talk about the future of investigative journalism this morning, and one thing that we, I think, are all aware of is the profound economic disruption in news. In the United States, over the last 20 years, something around 3,900 newspapers have closed, and about 40,000 news jobs have disappeared. In Europe, there's been a similar disruption, and probably all around the world. So we want to look at what happens to investigative journalism in that context. It is probably the most expensive kind of journalism to do. And in many news organizations, it can be the first thing that gets cut. It's a cost center. So we'll talk to our news leaders here about what they believe is their responsibility in ensuring that the future of investigative news is secure. To my left is Tracy Weber, the managing editor at ProPublica. Next on the panel is Rosina Breen. She is the editor of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism based in the UK. And at the far end is Ron Nixon. He is the Vice President of Investigations, Enterprise, Partnerships, and Ron, I forget the last word in your title.
Grants.
Grants. I was going to say fundraising. So I think we'll just start quickly with a short intro to what your news organizations do. Tracy, can you go ahead?
Hi, I'm Tracy Weber. I'm the managing editor of the national staff at ProPublica. And ProPublica is a response in large part to what Alison was talking about. It was started in 2008 by a wealthy couple who saw the dearth of investigative journalism in the United States and worried about what would fill it. And we only do investigative journalism, and we only do like accountability journalism, and our goal is impact. And we started with a small group in New York City, and now we are at probably 100 and a little over 150 editorial staffers. We have a national staff that's based in New York but has reporters across the country. And we started a local staff in which we have reporters based in 5 hubs around the country. And then we also have what's called a local reporting network, which we pair with a local journalism outfit, and we pay their reporter salary and their benefits for a year and support them in their work with editors and researchers. And they work with ProPublica for a year and produce things that are important to their community. And so we are we're grant funded. We're funded by donations entirely, but from wealthy individuals, from foundations, from small donors. And our budget is about $45 million, and a quarter of that comes from small donors.
Rosina.
Hi, I'm Rosina Breen. I'm the editor-in-chief and CEO at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. We, similarly to ProPublica, are an impact-led accountability investigations newsroom. We are a kind of startup. We launched in 2010. We were co-founded by a woman called Elaine Potter, who worked with the late Sir Harry Evans at the Insight team at the Sunday Times. And she wanted a newsroom that would spark change through investigations. So we proudly go beyond the headline to drive real-world change. We have impact producers embedded in our team who take our journalism to stakeholders, to government. Our aim is to shift policy at the sort of top end of the change of theory spectrum. We have 5 key verticals, although we are working much more intersectionality-wise. We have a bureau local team that is focusing on community-equipped reporting. We're really interested in where we can take the investigations into a new and more inclusive space. So we started reporting alongside the community. Our latest investigation is working with the trans plus community. So we will be looking at voter rights and harm caused to those communities. We have a big tech team that is looking at disinformation and elections. They also look at worker rights and experiences of those working in big tech companies. We have an environment team which looks at climate finance, deforestation, and AMR. We have a big global health team that essentially goes around the world. We're currently doing an immersive photojournalism investigation into AMR. And we have an enablers team essentially looking primarily at the flow of dirty money through London. So we're currently fighting what many are saying is a SLAP case, strategic lawsuit against public participation in the High Court. So we have quite a lot of legal incoming, and that case has cost £500,000 to date. We have a team of 40. I would say we are a young, not me, but my team is young-ish and diverse. Our senior management team are 50% women of colour. We have fellowships, but we are really focused also on diversity at all levels of the organisation and really thinking about our pivot to digital. We are a co-publisher, so we publish with partners of scale, so the New York Times, Mother Jones, the BBC, The Guardian, but we're also looking at our own direct audience. We've launched a membership program and are about to launch a podcast in June.
Thank you. And Ron, tell us a little bit more about investigations at the Associated Press.
Hi, Ron Nixon again, and among my many duties is overseeing the investigative team at the Associated Press. The AP has been around for a short period of time. It was founded in 1846, so it's been around for a few years. The investigative team at the AP has been around since 1967, and currently we've got reporters on every continent except for Antarctica, which we couldn't get anybody to volunteer to go to Antarctica. But so we work on national, international investigations. We partner with a number of other news organizations, but primarily the investigations that we produced are done and distributed by the Associated Press through its members and its customers around the world. And the investigations are done in all different formats. They're visual, they're text, and audio, among other things. So that's a little bit about what we do. Look forward to the conversation this morning.
So one of the challenges that I think that broadly the news industry is facing in terms of investigative and accountability journalism is, as I said, the ability to spend the money and the time to do these kinds of stories. And also, because the news industry has shrunk so much, there's this dearth of reporters coming up in investigations from their local communities. So let's talk a little bit about, one, how we build up journalists to become investigative reporters and journalists, diverse set of journalists who can speak about and to the various communities, and then how we make our work reach out to communities across all the populations in our area. So Tracy, you talked a little bit about trying to reach the communities who need to see the journalism that we do. Can you talk a little bit more about what you've done there?
So when ProPublica started, we were a small group of reporters based nationally. And what we realized is that we not only needed to have reporters reporting in the communities in which they lived, But with each investigation that we do now, we really interrogate how do we get our findings to the people that need to hear them. So when we do investigations, we really think about where are those people getting their news? Where are the people that we need to talk to? How are they engaging with us? We recently had a story in which we were writing about the abuse of dairy farm workers in the middle of the United States in the Midwest. And the reporters were trying to reach out to these dairy farm workers who were, mostly spoke Spanish and were migrants. And they realized that in the barns of the dairy farms, they were listening to a radio station, a music radio station, and they talked to the DJ at the radio station and convinced the radio station to let them go on the air and speak in Spanish and talk about their investigation and talk to the workers about what they were doing and why they needed to talk to them and where they could get information about their investigation once it was completed. And then after they did their investigation, of course, we published it on ProPublica's website, but that is not where those people would get their news. So we're publishing on ProPublica's website to, make sure that the people that can make changes read it, our readers read it, that we're reaching those communities. But then we put like little booklets and cards in local shops where the people in these communities would be shopping and interacting so that they could see the results of the investigation. They could contact us if they had more information. So we're really thinking about where are people getting their news, because ProPublica has a very certain, folks who go to our website and read it, but how do we get the stakeholders, how do we get the people who can make changes as a result of this? And every story we think about, how are we, and we have a whole team we call our engagement team, and they help us on every project brainstorm, how do we get the community that we need to talk to? How are we outreaching to them? And how do we then get what we find out to those communities? And that is an integral part of every investigation, because you realize, and at least for us, that there isn't really a national news organization. Lots of places have lost their, their local news media, and how are they hearing it? And however they're hearing it, that's where we're going to make sure that our findings are displayed.
Rosina, do you have an outreach strategy to reach communities that are affected by the news you guys write?
Yeah, I sort of think in terms of inclusion and approach, and to Tracy's point about going to where audiences are, communities are. My background is largely at the BBC, and I would observe in today's sort of environment, there is a loss of trust in public institutions. Media is sort of part of it, and if you are in a concrete building or a faceless sort of organization, people aren't going to either sort of come to your work or sort of influence your work in terms of the types of stories that we should be investigating. So, we need to go to the places where communities are, and we need to be embedded in the places that communities are. And if I think about sort of the talent that comes into the news industry or investigations in particular, one of the things that we need to really figure out is sustainability in our industry. And if we're looking at diversifying cohorts, it's not, you can't just rely on people who either have wealthy backgrounds, who can sort of be on short-term contracts, and who are sort of in an environment that is unsustainable for them. And also, I think we launched a community-led pilot end of last year. That's been enlivening, and it's also been challenging because we are commissioning and news gathering in a different way and sort of testing our own sort of processes and ways of thinking. But actually, if we are to kind of be fit for the future, we need to reflect the audiences that we are trying to serve. Our verticals are cross-demographic. I agree with sort of Tracy in that you may have a certain type of person who is accessing our work on websites or accessing the long reads. But actually our work across climate finance, you know, most people have bank accounts, the environment, climate, people care about that. Younger generations are kind of facing real pressures in terms of, you know, polarized politics, short-term policy, the world collapsing. So, you know, our investigations drive a real world change. There is a solutions element to it. So we also need to inspire people and sort of bring them in, and also, I guess, not have a certain type of person that comes into the newsroom that is the sort of investigative reporter. You know, a real life experience is a good starting point, and an understanding of what's really happening in those communities where people live. Otherwise, we're all kind of metropolitan commissioners or gatekeepers.
So Ron, the Associated Press obviously already has a reach that's global. And as you mentioned, you have reporters on every continent except Antarctica. How do you, one, choose what those reporters should cover, and then how do you work to get the news, ensure that the news is read by the people in the communities that they are covering?
So the first thing is having people from those regions. I mean, most of the people who are the international investigative reporters are actually from the regions that they cover. So it's not like we're sending people in who have to spend years trying to understand the culture, the language, the communities. These folks are from these places. So that, I think, is one of the things that's I don't think we overlook it, but I think in the past that hasn't been a concern. That we've in the past we've thought that we could just parachute people in to do stuff and then they're done without the cultural understanding, linguistical understanding of a particular area. So by having people from those regions, we tend to hire people from the actual places what they're cover. And in terms of getting that information to people that they can, the AP also publishes in different languages, so it lets people be able to read it in a language that they can understand. Granted, we can't do all the languages, but we do languages so that we can maximize the reach of the reporting that we are doing. And the other thing too is because it's in all of these different, because the AP serves other media outlets primarily. You're getting it even if you don't necessarily know that it's the AP. Although with the investigations it will say an AP investigation, but because the AP members and clients are television, it's radio, it's online publication. So all of those places, it gives us access to all of those different places in a way that maximizes the investigations.
Do you find that the news organizations, AP members, do you ever hear from them they're asking for investigations of certain things? I mean, I imagine many members, at least in the United States, have gutted their own investigations team.
I'm sorry, the question was, are they asking for?
Yeah, do you hear from them saying, we want more investigation?
Yeah, I mean, people, obviously tend to respond more to investigations from their regions. And so, we obviously have investigative reporters in China, so we do a lot of stuff related to China. We have investigative reporters in West Africa, Southern Africa, and so that the investigations come from those places, and it's also talking to the various members of the AP, or even at a conference like this, you're talking to people and you're hearing about various things, and you're like, oh, okay, well, we should have somebody look into that. So it comes in different ways, or sometimes someone will simply send an email or something that said, hey, or on WhatsApp, hey, you guys should look into this, and sometimes it pays off.
Tracy, can you describe in a little more detail how the local reporting network works at ProPublica, because that's a way to get into smaller communities?
So we're very proud of the local reporting network, and It started because we realized that there were a lot of local newspapers and radio stations and television stations that had lost their ability to do investigations that they had identified in their community that were important. So how it works is they apply to us and they say, here's the project we want to do, and they have a pitch, and we will actually go back and forth with their pitch to really push and poke about it, because we only take on a handful of them a year. And we also have office hours in which throughout the year different reporters can come and say, we'd like to do this, what do you think, and sort of help them develop their idea. Once they come on with us for a year, and in some cases we've taken on people for multiple years, they have our editor, an editor assigned with them to work with their editor. They have the research staff, they have our lawyers help them, they have our engagement reporter assigned to help them, and we do the project. Sometimes it's a rolling series, sometimes it's a big thing, sometimes it's a radio piece, and their stuff is published on ProPublica's website as well as on whatever their format is, radio, television, news. In some cases, we had one where we partnered with a local radio station, and then they've just had an award-winning podcast develop out of the story. So the stories develop. One of them, we partnered with a newspaper in Alaska, and they actually ended up making a fictional TV series on the reporting about sexual assaults in Alaska. So it has been a real inspiring thing. Almost every one of these stories and projects have gotten huge amounts of impact for the community. And last year we partnered with a publication in which about the schools throughout an entire state were falling apart. And after the series ran, the governor of that state pledged $2 billion to fix the buildings that were falling apart throughout the state. And that is something that makes us all, this makes it just worth it. And we just got a grant in order to, over the next 5 years, do a local reporting project in every one of the 50 states in the United States.
That's fantastic. Not to belabor the point, but I think it would be really nice to talk a little bit about the engagement strategy of that Idaho schools story, because this is a way that ProPublica really got a community involved.
So in that particular story, they're like, how can we really interrogate what's going on? The way it works, it's very confusing, but the way it works is that local bond measures determined funding to repair schools, the actual physical structure of schools. And most of these local communities were like, yeah, we don't want to devote money to that. So they did a survey of every superintendent of a school district in the entire state. And it was an astonishing, the superintendents responded to this survey, and then they got the students within the schools to take pictures of everything that was falling apart in their schools. It was amazing, and we published all of that stuff. And that was the pressure that convinced the state legislature and the governor that they needed to do something.
So we've talked a little bit about the loss also of journalism jobs and the inability sometimes of these smaller news organizations to develop investigative stories and therefore to train journalists to become investigative reporters. Rosina, have you seen in your efforts to find people to work at the Bureau a difficulty in pipeline, and do you do outreach in order to help train and bring along investigative journalists?
We have a number of entry routes into the Bureau. We're trying to diversify. So, as an example, we have an Aziz Fellowship, which aims to bring Muslim talent into the industry. Last year, we launched the inaugural Bruce Page Fellowship. Bruce Page was a Sunday Times insight editor and the editor of the New Statesman. And so we launched a fellowship in his name to encourage black talent to come into the newsroom. The fellowship was really open. We didn't ask for a certain portfolio. We were interested in what ideas candidates wanted to bring, their ability to storytell. So sometimes in our recruitment processes, we put up barriers of you must have a degree or you must have X number of years investigative experience. That also matters, but it's not exclusivity around those sort of competencies or capabilities. Our Aziz Fellow last year, Ms. Khan, delivered some great investigations alongside some of our reporters and was really well looked after and sort of matured by one of our editors. She then went on to apply for a junior reporter job in our environment team. And got it, and has recently pitched and secured funding for the immersive photojournalism investigation that is taking us to Pakistan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and now the US on a issue that is under reported and with a format that we know will reach more audiences in a way that they need to engage with. So I think those are sort of two examples. Billy Gay Jackson is our Bruce Page Fellow, has done some journalism before she came to us. So it's enlivening to bring different faces and different talent into the newsroom, but it doesn't just stop there. It's not about a tick box exercise or to say we have X number of people of colour or sexuality or gender or age. We also need to be inclusive, which is how do we support them engaging in meetings if they're quiet? How do we just take more creative risks? Don't mean editorial risks, but creative risks in terms of telling the story. How do we open the funnel in terms of commissioning? So, my idea of what might be a really forensic, distinctive investigation may not be the same as our editors or our deputy editors or our fellows, but we have to be open in the space. And I think the sort of F word, failure, is something that really doesn't pass our lips a lot. And, we were talking about, before we came on stage, about the pressure on investigative journalists to deliver. My background is daily news, so I really take my hat off to every single member of my team. It's not my discipline, but there is a really unusual pressure that comes with it. There is some lone working, but if you have spent a year on an investigation, you want to get that over the line. If it doesn't get over the line, you kind of think, what have I been doing for the past year? And also, if you are from an underrepresented community, or you're new to the game, or you don't quite have the skills, the pressure is even more intense because you're trying to do things in your own way with your authentic voice. And there is a sort of almost an institutional pressure as well that you're kind of working both to and against. So I think the culture of a newsroom really matters when we're thinking about diversifying talent. I mean, I would say I'm a non-traditional person. As a woman of colour, I haven't come through a traditional route. I just learned on the job, and it's taken me a few decades to get to where I am now. But so I think we can see it at all levels of the organisation, but it needs proper care. It needs exacting standards, but it needs care and an openness to say, okay, we are a collective. We're going to figure it out together, and we're going to take some creative risks.
And Ron, you've done several initiatives to bring more people both into AP's investigations team, plus your independent work through Ida B. Wells and training journalists. Can you talk a little bit about how you're supporting people learning how to become investigative journalists?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this, so I'll try and keep it succinct. I think the first thing is that when we're looking for talent, that's the thing that's first and foremost in my mind, the talent, right? But widening the pool that I'm drawing that talent from. I don't think in terms of numbers, like I need to check off boxes. I need to have this many black people, this many women, this many. I'm looking for talent. And if you widen your pool of people that you're looking for, you will get the talent, but you'll also get that diversity too. What happens is where we're drawing from this small pool, and that everybody's drawing from the same small pool, and we're going after the same people over and over and over again. So my thing is that we need to widen that. Why look at this small little pond and start fishing in the ocean, and you'll get these people. The other thing is we have to understand that we're not going to get unicorns. I think people look for the perfect candidate who knows everything. That's not going to happen, right? It may happen, but it's going to be rare that that's going to happen. So what I look for is, does that person have the one thing that I need? Like we hired a young man who from the Netherlands, Serginho Rosebla. He was not an investigative reporter, but he had his master's degree in documentary filmmaking. That's what I needed. I needed somebody to really transform how we do visual investigations, how we tell investigative stories visually. I can teach you the rest of it, but I need that one skill that I don't have. So it's not about checking boxes, but it's also not about thinking of having black and brown faces in the debate. It's about what do those people bring besides that black and brown face. I am black, obviously, but I'm also a veteran of the military. I'm from a very rural area. The area that I grew up in, there's 270 people, and I know all of them. And I did not major in journalism in college. I'm a music major. So it's like you're bringing different types of diversity when you're hiring people, and you can't think of it just in terms of what those people look like. And the last thing is that we have to get out of we have to make sure that when you bring people into an organization, you have the infrastructure to support them in that organization, so that when they get there, you're not just throwing them in the deep end of the water and they just drown because there's no support. And so when you bring people in, you need to be able to support them. Give them the backing that they need to succeed. Because if they fail, then that's on you. It's not really on them.
So one thing that you did, which I found fascinating, was created this sort of investigative fellows program at AP, which gave non-investigative reporters an opportunity. Is that something that's still going on? And can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah. So at the AP, we have the investigative team is about 36 people now. But we also wanted to not be siloed into just having just the investigative team. So there's a number of ways that we work to maximize investigations at the AP. The thing that Alison just mentioned is what we call our investigative correspondence program. So we bring in journalists who are on other teams at the AP to be part of they attend the meetings of the investigative team. They're in the Slack channels. They get support for the investigations that they do. For all intents and purposes, they're on the investigative team. I just don't pay for their salaries, thank God. But other than that, they're just with our team. So it's a way of bringing people in who may not get the opportunity. And then we also have this thing we call the Gene Heller investigative fellowship, where we bring two people in, a mid-career journalist and an early career journalist, who have a project that they want to work on. We pay for it from the investigations budget. It gets edited by investigative editors. But it's part of the work that they do for their particular team. So if you're on the business team, you have a project, we'll take it, we'll edit it, but it's part of your overall duty. So that's some of the ways that now I will just if I could just add one other thing. One of the things I also did just outside of the AP is I co-founded an organization called the Ida B. Wells Society. Ida B. Wells is a famous African-American journalist back in the 19th and late 19th century, early 20th century. And that organization works to increase the number of people of color in this field of investigative reporting. One of the things that we do is we partner with news organizations around the country: New York Times, Washington Post, ProPublica, Miami Herald, Indianapolis Star, AP, USA Today, and there's somebody else. But the organization, we fund an internship at those news organizations, because our feeling is that you can talk and you can ask people to do things, or you can provide the funding so there's no excuses of why you can't have people doing internships there. So we want to have skin in the game that gives these journalists opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise. And 3 of the participants who have gone through that program, internships, they actually ended up winning Pulitzer Prizes. And I can only imagine being a kid at 22, 23 years old with a Pulitzer Prize. That's just astonishing.
That's great to hear. Tracy, can you talk a little bit more about what ProPublica is doing in terms of bringing along journalists, and about your philosophy in bringing along journalists? Yeah.
So one of the toughest jobs at ProPublica is the senior editor job. You have 5 to 6, sometimes 7 reporters underneath you, each doing a very high-stakes, stressful investigative project. And all of them are completely, we always say that everyone at ProPublica has some form of mental illness, because we're all so stressed and anxiety, and we're very intense. And we realized that we were having a tough time attracting senior editors from diverse backgrounds. And as we got to ProPublica, we realized that that's because in a lot of newsrooms, diverse people are not steered into the investigative job, and that many newsrooms didn't really have investigative teams anymore, and we were seeing a dearth in training. So last year, for the first year, we decided we're going to hold an investigative editors boot camp to attract diverse candidates and give them training, give them a taste of what it's like, support them in their work. And we had an unbelievable amount of applicants for this, even from places like the Washington Post and the New York Times, to small news organizations, to video investigative journalists who wanted the training that we could give. A huge number of our staffers, taught classes for a week. It was a true boot camp. It was exhausting, and they got a lot of training. But I think we had like 160 applicants for 10 spots last year. We're doing it again this year. And it was super rewarding, because we were able to say, if we don't think that the industry as a whole, not just ProPublica, has enough diverse editing candidates, what are we doing about it? And we feel like we got a funder to fund the boot camp. And this is good for the whole industry. And it was very interesting to have them talk about the few opportunities, even at major news organizations, to get this kind of training. And it is a very hard job, and you need a lot of skill sets. You need to be able to direct both the investigative reporting, figure out how to put this whole package together, help with elevating the writing and the presentation of it, and manage high-stakes investigations with nervous reporters. So that's what we've been doing with that, and it's been great.
So I want to open up to questions in a few minutes, but first I just want to ask sort of a pointed question, because you're all talking about what you have been doing both in fostering good investigative journalism in your organization and making sure it gets out there. Do you feel, or do you think, that it is actually the responsibility of people in positions like yours, these privileged positions at the top of really strong investigative reporting, to ensure the future of investigative reporting, to ensure that it is viable and full and creates impact? Do you think that it is your job to do that? Rosina, you're nodding. Go ahead, talk about that.
Yeah, I sort of was thinking what the words to describe what I think leaders in our space are, and it's to lead with courage, conviction, compassion, and with ambition and adaptability. I mean, if we're not fighting for what we do in the future for what we do, you know, who else is going to do that? We need to be the best advocates for investigative journalism. You said it's expensive, it takes time, it's stressful, it's litigious. You know, the funding space is really challenging, and, you know, look at the world around us, look at the polarization of politics, look at the lack of accountability, look at the, you know, I've come from a daily newsroom environment where, you know, we've had Brexit elections around the world, terror attacks, we've got wars going on now. The daily news agenda is so angry that the space for deep investigative journalism needs to kind of fight its space and keep making a difference. So I absolutely believe that unless we have that conviction that what we do is needed, you know, ever more needed for the long term, we're not necessarily going to get there. And also, you know, I think one of the pressures that we have at the Bureau, we're non-profit funded, so we tend to get kind of year-on-year cycles of funding. But some of our investigations have gone on for years. And, you know, some of the investigations that we need to do are not just within a 12-month cycle. These are kind of long haul investigations.
Do your funders lose patience with those investigations?
Do we what, sorry?
Do your funders ever lose patience with those investigations?
No, they don't. I mean, I would say we have a kind of really great cohort of funders who admire what we do for what we do. I would say the editorial funding pipeline can typically be here's 12 months, you know, sort of, that's amazing to have the grants. But actually, if we are trying to go to the next level of investigations, it's not about short-termism. And 12 months is quite short. So, you know, it has to be sustainability, long-term. What are we going at that is coming over the hill? Climate migration, for example. Is something that, you know, is already happening, but what's that going to look like in 5 years' time?
Ron, what about you? Do you feel like it is your job to ensure the future of investigative journalism?
Yes, I think, well, not think, I know that it is, because if we don't do it, then nobody else will. We have to ensure that the work that we do continues to grow and to expand, even as we face these, you know, economic winds in our faces. Because when you think about it, investigative reporting, a lot of what we know about things that happen in the world is the result of investigative reporting. Oftentimes, it takes the place of what should be government investigations or audits into wrongdoings, so that if we're not there, those things don't come to light. We have to ensure that the next generation of people are not only, you know, equipped to do so, but there are revenue streams that we have to ensure that this types of work happens. And when I say revenue streams, it means that organizations can no longer depend on like one source of revenue to ensure that it gets done, but there may be 4 or 5 or 6 revenue streams that we have to juggle at the same time, because this work is costly. You know, it's not going to get you as many hits as what the Kardashians are doing, but it is essential. Maybe we can get Kim Kardashian to be an investigation, and then we can.
That would be helpful. Tracy, do you have anything to add?
I was thinking about this last year. We put a team of reporters on threats to democracy, and it was the first time we had sort of put a group of reporters on a topic, which we don't usually do. And we sort of notionally said, look at the judiciary in the United States. And those reporters, and I always say we have a ProPublica lens in which we look at things, they're the ones that uncovered that on the US Supreme Court, one of the justices, well actually 2 of the justices, but one in particular, was taking all kinds of trips from billionaires. And they were funding trips all over the world. And they used unbelievably inventive reporting techniques to track these trips that he was taking on the yachts and in the private planes and various places. And I thought, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't know that. And that was going on for decades. And how important it is to have this kind of watchdog journalism to sort of take you to places. And it's really hard work, and it's really labor intensive. And if we need to have that kind of reporting. The world is on fire, and we need both the breaking news coverage, we need the analysis, but we also need to go back and figure out, how is this happening? Why is this happening? Who's responsible for this happening, and how do we fix it? And that's something that's all of our responsibilities to keep alive.
Great, so I'd like to bring the conversation together a little bit. If anybody has questions, there's a couple of rules that are my rules, which is your question should be a question, not a speech. Raise your hand, say who you are, and if your affiliation, if you want to. And I see a hand right here. And please speak loudly enough that we can, oh, there is a microphone, thank you. Wait for the microphone, that's rule number 3. I don't think the microphone's on.
Hello? There we go. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Glass. I'm a longtime international correspondent and editor. I had a question for you, Tracy. I love that you know the story about going to finding the radio stations and talking to the DJs, finding out where people are finding their news. How do you get around that when the news is on Facebook and the algorithm you see and the news feed you see is different from the news feed that other people see?
That's a very good question. We have our engagement reporters are expert at finding communities on social media and finding out where people are gathering in various ways. We tried to figure that out, and you're right, especially because the algorithm is shifting for communities. And I think each project is a little bit different. We recently did a thing about insurance denials, and that in the United States, if your health insurer denies your care, you can appeal that. And if they deny it, you are able to ask your insurer for all the information about why your claim was denied. And we put out QR cards with QR codes in various places, doctor's offices, such, so that, you know, people could look and see how to get their documentation, but also share it with us. So we're always thinking about ways to get at folks, but it's a very good question that we interrogate, I guess, each one a little bit different.
So if I can take moderator's privilege, ProPublica also recently hired 2 social video producers, and this is just the last couple of months, and 2 stories that I edited, they produced, and they made into sort of 3-minute Instagram reels. And I am stunned at how much information and how accurate and how well done these are, while still having that attitude that, like, my young adult children are, where they get their news from Instagram and TikTok. And, you know, it'll be like, listen up, I want to tell you about baby formula, you know, but it's still incredibly well done and accurate, goes through our lawyers, goes through the editing process that every other thing does. And I think that is going to be something that more and more of us who are editing 5,000-word stories are going to find more of our news gets around through 4-minute videos. Over here, and then I'll go to the back. Is there any?
Thank you. My name is Fernando Morales de la Cruz. I lead an initiative known as the Louis Hine Initiative. I'm sure you've heard of Louis Hine. I would like to ask you if there is any intention to cooperate between you, because many of you, like your team Ron, has reported about child labor, for example. But what I don't see, all of the pieces of the puzzle come together, because when you see child labor in Asia or in Africa or in Latin America or inside of the United States, like the New York Times has reported, you never see anybody putting all the numbers together and saying, oops, there are tens of millions of children actually working in the supply chains of the United States. So my ask to any of you, or to all of you, is if there is any plan to try to come together and say, okay, on the issue of child labor, maybe we should add up the numbers, and maybe we should chase all the companies, because this is a business model.
So we do a lot of that by teaming with, and mainly what we try to do is unless it's a very nationally focused investigation, we do try to make it international. So, for instance, we just did a big piece about prison labor in the United States, but we connected it to the supply chains throughout the world. That it's because what really drew people into it is not that the fact that people in prisons are working, is that the stuff that they produce is in the supply chains of the foods that you eat. So we tried to link that internationally because the United States has laws that it can't import stuff that's made by forced labor, except that we export stuff that's made by forced labor. So that, it's again tying those things to global. I think there is room for more news organizations around the world to work together to draw all of those things together. I think in the mode of ICIJ and some of the other groups that work together. I know that Bureau of Investigative Journalism has done some of that work. We've done some. I don't think it's enough, and I think there's a lot more room to grow, because the way that you do get people interested in that, you tie it to something. When Alison was my colleague at the Associated Press, one of the things we did a thing about palm oil, an investigation on palm oil, particularly child labor, and we tied it to, the story was about two young girls. One young girl harvesting the palm oil, and a young girl who was selling Girl Scout cookies in the United States, and how they were linked by this supply chain of the palm oil. Right now, I think, again, there is room for news organizations giving declining budgets and resources to team up to do more of that. And I'd be more than happy to chat with you more about that offline.
So we're just about out of time. Do Regina or Tracy, do you want to add anything to that before we?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of Bureau's mandate is for cross-border collaborative journalism. We have been part of the ICIJ consortia. We sort of were part of the Panama Papers, and we've led Bureau-led consortia. I mean, our strength is in, or our power is in collaboration, and actually really interested in the global sort of threads that sort of join key issues. So migrant workers is one of our recent sort of global stories that we've done with international partners. I completely agree with that approach.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting the high sign. So if you all want to ask us anything more, we're around this week. So very nice to have all of you. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all your insights.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.